Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.
Hello and welcome to Northern Lights. My name is Diane Wilson and I'm the editor for Minnesota Literature, which is a monthly publication of news and information for writers, readers, publishers, and supporters of literature in Minnesota. We'll be interviewing Heid Erdrich today at Birch Books, which is a bookstore in Minneapolis. Birch Books is owned by Heid's sister, Louise Erdrich, and is easily one of the most exquisite bookstores in the Twin Cities. Heid is a poet who lives in St. Paul, but she grew up in North Dakota, and her parents both taught at the Wahpeton Indian School. Heid has degrees at Dartmouth College and Johns Hopkins University, and she is a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Ojibwe. She teaches Native American literature and creative writing at the University of St. Thomas. Heid's first collection of poetry, Fishing for Myth, won the Minnesota Voices Project Award in 1995. It was published by New Rivers Press in 1997 and was nominated for a Minnesota Book Award in 1998. She is also the co-editor of an anthology of writing by Native American women titled Sister Nations, Native Women Writing on Community. She is also currently working on a new collection of poetry titled The Honey Guide. Welcome, Heid.
Welcome, Diane.
Glad to talk to you today. I thought we'd start with your first book, Fishing for Myth, and which you open with a quote about myth that says, "If myths are impossibilities, they are to be believed with fervor, in no small part due to their quality of impossibility." I wonder if you would tell us a little bit about the importance of myth in your book and in your writing.
That quote is from a sort of controversial book that outlines the Ojibwe creation story by a non-Ojibwe person. But one of the things I appreciated about that particular book by Christopher Vesci is that it's a book called Imagining Ourselves Richly. It explains at the beginning of the book how myth should be perceived and how only recently people perceived myth as meaning untrue. It's sort of a Western mindset about what myth is. And myth meant more a realization of the archetype, a realization of how things could be possible in our lives that seemed impossible, and looking at particular images, particular figures that we call mythic now, that in the past were understood as metaphors for our possible selves. So I really appreciate that book for that particular insight, and it helped me to understand what I was doing in my own poetry. I was often sort of translating my own experience or the experience of people in my life into recasting it in mythic, in a mythic way, giving people the qualities of the figures I understood from everywhere, from fairy tales, from traditional stories, from the Bible, for any of the traditional sources of literature that I encountered in my life.
These are your own personal legends.
Right, they're my own personal myth of recasting and recognizing people in my lives as, you know, my friend who was pregnant at 15 as Eve, thinking of her as Eve, thinking of, you know, a friend's sort of abusive boyfriend as the Beast from Beauty and the Beast, and as my girlfriends, like the Ojibwe women in the stories who marry the stars, thinking of them as those characters.
So you've brought out the mythic qualities in your memories.
Yeah.
I was also struck by how physical your writing is. that you have frequent references to animals, starlings, whales, dogs, and relationships with all of them. It seems they play an important role in your life and in your writing.
I think I want to recognize and help other people recognize our humanity is a creaturely humanity. We are, you know, I don't really feel that sense of hierarchy, and a lot of my poems deal with recognizing how we learn things from animals, birds, fish. There's a lot of birds and fish, and my editor, the person who did the substantive editing, was Leslie Adrian Miller, the poet, and she kept saying, we got to get the birds and the fish apart, get some more creatures in there. So I wrote the dog poem specifically to make that cut, the connection.
Well, you seem profoundly aware of landscape as well. Even your love poems were expressed in terms of landscape.
Yeah, I think, you know, landscape informs us, and we do everything according to where we live and where we have lived, with the places we've come from for, you know, hundreds of years. And I think that I had to recognize that, especially both personally and politically, because I have a sense of the land as being important to us, because Native people have to struggle still to retain their land.
And are you especially inspired by the land that you grew up in, North Dakota?
I grew up in the Red River Valley, and I think I left at a fairly young age. I left as a young teenager to go away to school, and I missed it. And a lot of these poems were written when I lived on the East Coast, and I missed that landscape. So I think a lot of it came out of the longing for that landscape, but I still do find a lot of my sensibility, my aesthetic coming out of that landscape, the flatness, the openness, the birds and the water and the sky.
Well, I've asked Heid if she would read one of the poems titled Human Map, which I believe was inspired from a project scientists constructed of analyzing DNA samples in order to reconstruct human history, which is just a fascinating attempt. So if you would please read that poem to us and maybe comment on your inspiration for it.
I'd be happy to do that. This poem is called Human Map, and it contains quotes from a Washington Post article from 1993 that was titled, "By Analyzing DNA Samples from 400 Ethnic Groups, Scientists Could Reconstruct Human History." I will indicate quoted materials by quoting and unquoting. You will be happy to know that someone has asked our cells to tell, in their own bloody language, whether or not all Indian tribes descend from a single group that migrated from Asia. Your own body contains the answer in the map. Hidden within the DNA of each human being is a record of that person's ethnic history. Just one drop can read like a mystery, all the way back to humanity's dim evolutionary past. Without a flashlight, scientists can trace the ancient migrations and ancestral intermixings that have shaped every tribe and culture on Earth. Still, it's too late to test Sky Woman, whose breath of life exists in all creatures, or Thought Woman, who imagines us even now, or any of the first beings who survived by tricks. Too late, so they will have to settle for your blood. Some local tribal jokesters call this the Vampire Project. Rumor has it, donations need no consent, and any clinic might be in on it. So go ahead, give blood. It's your civic duty. Anthropologists, our old friends, support this needy and urgent cause. And who knows, you may be one of the hip people, historically interesting population, who they note are vanishing at an alarming rate. Vanishing. They make it sound so passive, as if whole peoples simply fade away. You say you won't go to the blood drive, but the needle's nothing new. Bloodshed always determines who inherits a patch of earth. Even they admit their findings might be used to support increasingly incendiary claims of land tenure in ethnic disputes. Do not fear this genetic tattooing. If they keep it up long enough, they will discover we all belong to one mother. Scholars insist the concept of race long ago lost its scientific validity. And you know how well the general public embraces these subtle distinctions and complex genetic notions. Soon racism, as we know it, will end. Whether we help them or not is no matter. Our blood will out. Our body's code will crack. They will have their map.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to write this poem?
I was reading in the Johns Hopkins Gazette when I was in graduate school, one of the first articles on the Human Genome Mapping Project. And I had just begun hearing from people that there were small groups, tribes, these hip people, they call the historically interesting populations, very small groups, who had been exploited. They'd used genetic material to patent drugs, and there was a big question about who was going to get this information and who had control of their own bodies, their own genes. And I thought it was a really interesting sort of take on what everybody was praising as this wonderful project, this genome mapping project. And, you know, and I predicted, rightly so, that two things would happen. One, they'd discover that we have much more in common, and it's very hard to distinguish between peoples who are supposedly unalike from different tribes or cultures, and that in fact happened. And the other, that they would find out that land tenure, the tenure of people in the places they say they come from, places they feel indigenous, would turn out to be much longer than they had originally expected. And those things have happened. And of course, people will say, well, this makes people afraid to give blood. And I said, no, it's not about that. One of my students was very upset by this. And I said, no, really, I just wanted to point out that science and its way of looking at things can be perceived differently by different people.
Yeah. And it does raise really interesting questions about race and culture and what is learned behavior and what is genetic.
Yeah, and I mean, it's curious to me, and where those people, the original people, where they are in your body and in your blood is a question that I think a lot of different Native groups ask, and they ask people, especially people of mixed background, to sort of ask themselves that. And in a way, I was going after that question too. A different audience would see that.
Yeah.
But
well, I like that it challenges some of the assumptions about race in it. So I thought that was an interesting selection to be included with so many very physical, earthy poems.
Thanks.
So, moving on to the anthology that you're working on, that you're co-editing with Laura Tohe from the University of Arizona. This is a collection of poetry and prose that'll be published by the Minnesota Historical Society Press in early 2002. And it's titled Sister Nations, Native Women Writing on Community. Can you tell us about this theme, women writing on their roles in community and their relationships with other women?
I wanted very much to present an anthology that allowed Native women to reveal what has been really a wonderful part of my life, the closeness of friendships of Native women, the dependence of Native families and Native organizations, cultures, tribes on Native women that is not really obvious to the general public. When there's a question in the Native community, who stands up in front of the TV cameras, it's usually a Native man. And there are a lot of reasons for that, and it depends a lot on the situation. But I really wanted to foreground Native women with other Native women. So we sent out a call asking people to send us writing that describes those roles and those interdependencies. And we got a lot of beautiful writing on women's grandmothers, their sisters, quite a few poems on reacting to love, male-female love interests from a sort of girlfriend's perspective that I find those very funny. A number of poems on the Native women struggling against the stereotype and image from the outside that makes them really sort of invisible or sexualized. And that part struck me the most of all the things that we got. I was very interested in how people responded to the sort of Indian princess or the Pocahontas kind of imagery, which is really what most people perceive us as. And of course, it's just a tiny bit of what the history of Native women has been and what the reality is.
So, in a sense, then this work challenges some of those stereotypes.
Yeah, absolutely. plays with them too.
And creates a more realistic view of Indian women in their community. It strikes me that women play a significant role in your life, that especially with your family, that your mother's an artist, your sisters are writers and artists, and how has your role in community and in relationship with other women affected your work?
I think, you know, my first response would be to say it's everything, because I feel my confidence came really from, you know, both my sisters and my mother being artists or valuing art in their lives, and from coming to the Twin Cities. I came to the Twin Cities from Baltimore, where I'd felt very alienated and very distant. It was you know, I'd gone there for school and stayed there because I fell in love, met my husband. And I wanted to come to the Twin Cities and be around Ojibwe people, be around that community, and I found a writing community here. I worked with the Loft, met Roberta Hill Whiteman, Bobby Hill, who ended up being my mentor and working with me, and I'm very grateful to her for that, and other writers, Pauline Danforth, eventually met Marcy Rendon, and a number of other Native women writers who, just knowing that they can do it and seeing how they approach things and talking with them has just really increased my own, the richness of my own writing and my feeling of writing into community and out of community. It's a really valuable part of my life. And
so the women writers have inspired you and supported you throughout your work.
Yeah, and I think we try to do that for one another.
Well, and your family is, it's almost like a creative dynasty in some ways. I was reading through Stories Migrating Home, another anthology, and just looking through the table of contents, there's 3 Erdrichs in there, which is fairly amazing presence for one family to have that much writing talent. Not to mention, I don't know if we did mention the fact that this artwork is your sister Angie's.
Yep, my sister Angie did a detailed watercolor painting from an Audubon print. She, you know, reinterpreted it for me. It's a Luna moth, a little green heron hunting a Luna moth, so it's sort of a joke. Fishing for myth, it's like fishing for a moth. It's a fishing bird going after a moth.
Well, and we're going to read we're going to ask you to read another poem from the anthology that also that talks about the stereotype images of Indian women that you were just mentioning, and also has a very touching insight into your relationship with your mother.
Yeah, this is one of those from experience poems, not one of. Yeah, and I'm going to set it up just really quickly to say that I was doing a all-day workshop in St. Cloud the other day, and I asked people to tell me what images of Native women they had seen recently, and would they pick up, you know, any Native women out of a photo lineup, and they couldn't. This was just a general Minnesota audience, and I said, "Have you seen this woman?" So the poem has to do with this woman.
And who hasn't seen her?
Yeah, they all had seen her. Butter Maiden and Maize Girl survive death leap. Even now, Native American Barbie gets only so many roles. Indian Princess, Pocahontas, or in these parts, Winona, maiden who leapt for brave love from the rock that overlooks that Minnesota town where eagles mate. In my day, she might have been asked to play Minnehaha, Laughing Waters, or the lovely one on the TV corn oil ads, We Call It Maize, or even Captain Hook's strangely Asian Tiger Lily. Oh, what I would have done for a Chippewa Barbie. My mother refused to buy the tourist souvenir princesses in brown felt dresses belted with beads stamped made in China. They're stunted, Mom would say, her lips in that line that meant she'd said the last word. She was right. Those dolls' legs were stubby as toddlers, though they wore sexy women's clothes. They were brown as Hershey bars, and Mom pointed out, clothed in bandanas and aprons and sold as Southern gals. Most confusing was the feather that sprouted at the crown of each doll's braided hair. Do they grow there? A playwright once asked, showing me the doll her father bought her at Mount Rushmore. I recall she gazed at my own brown locks, then stated, Your mom was an Indian princess. My denial came in an instant. My mother had warned me, tell them our tribe didn't have any royalty. But there was a problem of believability, you see. Turns out, Mom had floated in the town parade in feathers, raven wig, and braids when crowned maiden to the college brave in the year before she married. Oh, Mom, you made it hard on all of us what you did at 18. And worse, the local rumor that it was you on the butter box from the Land O'Lakes that graced most tables in our tiny town, you on their toast each morning, you the object of the joke, the trick the boys learned of folding the fawn-like butter maiden's naked knees up to her chest to make a pair of breasts. I cannot count the times I argued for Mom's humble status, how many times I insisted she was no princess, though a beauty, who just happened to have played along in woodland drag one day. I wonder, did my sisters have to answer for the princess? Did you? Couldn't we all have used a real doll, a round, brown, or freckled, jeans and shawl-wearing powwow teen queen, a real lifelike native Barbie? Better yet, two, who take the plunge off Lover's Leap in tandem and survive.
Well, I think we've got a little bit of time left to talk about your new work, The Honey Guide, which I understand focuses around the period a couple years ago when you were going through pregnancy and your son's birth.
Yep, I tried very much to capture that really difficult time when I think most women couldn't possibly write, but I had some time protected by my wonderful husband. And I wrote about the birth and the postpartum period, and I have a lot of poems. And it's called The Honey Guide because it, being brought to the sweetness of having an infant was something that had to be done very deliberately for me. And the honey guide is a bird that brings people to the honey. It's an African bird, so I sort of use that as my emblem. There are a lot of bees in my poems as well. Sort of sense of seeking out the honey was what I was trying to imagine in those poems.
And you've also recently been awarded a Bush Leadership Fellowship grant. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you'll be doing? I understand you have 18 months of travel and study coming up.
And God bless 3M, God bless Post-it notes. I'm so grateful for this chance. I'm going to work with Ojibwe writers and continue my own writing, and I'm going to seek the heart of the question, is there such thing as an Ojibwe literature? Obviously Ojibwe writers are writing for the most part in English. Some people are using the Ojibwe language, and I'm very interested in learning more about Ojibwe language, language recovery, and how that has influenced the writers who are publishing today.
And you also do curating work with Native writers?
I've been working on the new Native Words series, the Friends of the Library in St. Paul, and Birch Bark, Black Bear Crossing, Como Pavilion, and the Minnesota Historical Society and SASE, the Right Place of All, collaborated to do a series of readings with Native writers, which is very important to me, finding a venue for people, finding a way to include Native writers in the general dialogue, the general offering of performance literature is something that I've pretty much dedicated myself to. I love it.
Well, from my work with Minnesota literature, I've seen the Native writers have a very strong role in Minnesota's literary community. How do you define your role in that community?
I hope that I'm helping people find a place to speak and speak their words. I see myself as facilitating that and helping mentor younger writers. It's something I've always wanted to do.
I've noticed that there seems to be a close connection between your writing and your involvement with the Native community and the work you do curating and mentoring, that this is part of your deeply held personal beliefs.
Well, that's the heart of it for me, is I'm not doing this just for myself, and I'm certainly not doing it for an academic audience. It's, my favorite audience would be a bunch of Native women, young girls, and if I could get them to laugh, that'd be it for me.
So this is a way of giving back, too, for you?
Yeah, I think we can.
Well, thank you, Heid. It has been a great pleasure to talk with you
Thanks.
today and hear more about your work, and I'm looking forward to the books that you have coming out.
Thanks.
And thanks also to Birch Bark Books for hosting us today, and to Northern Lights for making this program possible.
The lore of the store. This is it. Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how the store started. This used to be a dentist's office, and we stripped it down, and my daughters helped. There's a lot of help from the Native community here, which really was appreciated. And slowly we used a lot of recycled stuff, Heid's furniture, my furniture, everybody's furniture, and we made a store. And then we had to get books for this store.
That was fun.
Our vision for this store is manifold. We have many pieces to the vision. Let's start by talking about the piece about Native writers.
So it was great. It was a place for people to come and do some of their work, both emerging writers, established writers, youth writers. We've had some very young writers come in and be brave, and friends of friends and people on book tours, and it's just been wonderful because it's a very intimate audience.
We did copy Odegaard's. We have a wall which people sign, but a lot of places do it now. It's just become a craze. The other thing about the store is we really wanted to showcase Native arts and contemporary artists, but also the traditional arts. So it was a chance finally to do a little of this to do something with our Erdrich buying habit.
Yeah, that's true.
Because we loved it. We all of us in our family want to support Native artists, and so we could either accumulate this painfully and slowly for ourselves, or we could sell it, which is a much better idea, and find it and support people who are doing some of these fantastic pieces of work. We're going to be a gallery for Native artists, and we will be putting on shows, and those will connect with the Native writers. And we also have a bigger inventory of Native books than I think anywhere else in the city, and that was very important to us. We're a source for teachers to come who are interested in having Native work, Native writers in their classes, and we're a source for teachers throughout the city and throughout the state. In fact, people come down here to find really great, accurate depictions of Native children and Native ways of life. And we wanted to have a place that is a place for eccentricity. I mean, this isn't your corporate bookstore, obviously. And I know we seem very corporate, but we're really not. We have a family that really treasures the uniqueness of every individual. But we also really are a neighborhood bookstore and a city bookstore, and citywide I think we have a wonderful literary set of readers. So one of our favorite things to do is to really keep up on the latest in contemporary literary fiction.
Northern Lights, a look at Minnesota books and writers, is presented by the Minnesota Center for the Book, a program of the Minnesota Humanities Commission, with funding provided by Target Stores and the Elmer L. and Eleanor J. Anderson Foundation.